Trigger warning. This episode may discuss one or more of the following topics: violence, death, including that of people of Indigenous descent, war, abuse, medical issues, self-harming behaviour, eating disorder behaviour or body shaming, drug and alcohol addiction, sexual activity, hate speech or strong abusive language, discrimination, and stereotypes. These potential topics have remained part of the episode as it forms part of the interviewee's story, which cannot be accurately told without including such information. Viewer and listener discretion is advised.
Another episode of Spectrum Uncensored. Today I have with me Kate, and she is from the Gold Coast in Queensland. Thank you for your time today.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for yours. It's lovely to be here.
No problems. Would you like to tell me a little bit about what you do?
Yes, so I'm a children's author. I write books for 8 to 12-year-olds, really, kind of that bracket. But I mean, generally the audience can stretch either side. I'm 45 and I generally only read kids' books now. So, but yes, it's that middle grade market and a little bit younger as well. I like to kind of write books as well for 6+. So yeah, I write about books that generally have dogs in or animals. I'm pretty dog mad, and I like to put the most important thing really at the core of all my books is putting autistic kids in a glowing, wonderful spotlight and allowing them to be the heroes of their own stories.
I love that. There's something about kids' books. I'm the same. I love a good kids' book. So what are some of them called?
Oh, okay. So my first book was published 2021. That was Paws. And that is about an autistic boy who is about to graduate primary school, head off to high school. And as is the case with a lot of autistic people, it can be kind of unsettling, often very scary. So it's really this boy's, he thinks if he makes a really good friend before he graduates, then that transition is going to be so much easier. So he comes up with this flawless, 3-step plan that's going to work, of course, and it doesn't. But he has this very wonderful, reliable friend in his cockapoo, Kevin, who has his own plans going on. So it's just a very warm, wholesome book about a boy trying to make a friend and thinking that he's, the way he's doing it is correct. So that was my first book. Followed by that was The Bravest Word. And that was a bit more, I guess a lot of people called that one confronting. That was very much deep diving into childhood depression, but before diagnosis. I know a lot of books are out there that really investigate depression, post-diagnosis, therapy, that kind of thing. But this was all about pre-diagnosis, which I just don't think people know enough about. Then followed by that was Harriet Hound, which is a beautiful little 8-year-old autistic girl who is, of course, a superhero. And of course, her magical power is dogs. And then there was the next book that came out last July was The Unlikely Heroes Club, which is about actually 5 autistic kids who are put together in these incredibly boring holiday classes, but a mystery unfolds and they have to kind of come together. So that's the 4 main books that I have out at the moment.
It sounds like they're all really relevant to real life though. And that makes it really relatable. So and even you were talking about dogs and loving dogs. I'm a dog lover too. And just how therapeutic animals are, especially for people on the spectrum. My son has a Labrador, and sometimes I wonder if she is his therapy animal or if he's her therapy human.
Yeah.
But she's a little anxious too, but she's a beautiful dog and she's always by his side and he always is looking for her. And since our other dog had passed away last year, he's actually grown a stronger bond with her because I didn't expect him to grieve over our other dog like he did, but because she was a husky and she was more of a lone wolf, and would go off and do her own thing. But just her lack of presence and him going to her spot and she's not there anymore was enough, of a kind of traumatic experience, I suppose. But it's really brought him closer to his dog River, and he asks to take her everywhere now. So
Yeah,
he'll want to go in the car to McDonald's or something, and he'll ask for River to come, and she's just like, I'm not going to say no to that.
yeah,
So
yeah,
um,
absolutely.
yeah, they're quite the like dynamic duo,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
really lovely to see that he's kind of got that little protector. When we go out and things and go to the beach, she won't leave him. She's with him at all times. So, yeah, there's just something about it. Kids, I feel like, especially kids on the spectrum, tend to relate better to animals than people.
Mm.
But I think
Oh,
that's,
I couldn't agree more. I
they don't
think,
judge.
well, exactly. I think that's one of the main things is that dogs, animals, yeah, in general, but I think dogs, because they are just kind of they need humans, I think,
Yep.
more so than so many other animals. So I think there's that automatic bond is there with dogs. But I do find, yeah, a lot of spectrum kindred, they do love the fact that they don't judge, but also communication with dogs is so much simpler. There's none of these layered rules and expectations. It's all just very straightforward. These are the needs. This is what we need to do. And it's just reassuring, and it's comforting, and it's simple. And of course, their loyalty and love is just unbreakable. And I think that for autistic people, that means so much. I know a lot of auties have those kind of issues with not necessarily always making friends, but I think keeping friends and navigating friendships. So when you have a dog, and it's just 24 hours, 100% friendship, love, loyalty. It's just grounding and enriching, and yeah, it makes sense. Like, to me, it's obvious.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, there's no fear of rejection either, because like they literally will just keep coming back to you no matter what. And
Yeah,
I can see the look on our dog's face when our son has a meltdown, for example. She looks more worried than scared,
yeah,
and she's not sitting there judging him. She's just wanting to know he's okay and wanting to
yeah.
know what's going on. So I think too, because my son's nonverbal, it's a connection with something else that's nonverbal
Yeah,
too, because it's kind of going off each other's body language and regulation and things
totally.
like that. So um,
Yeah,
I do see that a lot in both of them. If she's really energetic, he's really energetic, and if he's really worried, she's really worried. So they
yeah.
definitely kind of, yeah. And what kind of made you decide to incorporate the dogs into the books? Is it that reason?
Oh, very much. That's really at the core. But I mean, Paws was the first book that I just totally, I guess, derailed my previous books that I'd always written. I always wrote more, I guess, more adventure, more horror. I love a bit of horror. So Pause was just a complete detour. But it was a book that I carried around, or a story I carried around for so many years, because it is all based on real life. And at the core of it is this relationship between the dog and the boy. And that is the case with my youngest son and our first rescue dog that we had. When we went to pick up Claude, our Spoodle, it was like he'd been briefed. Somebody had called ahead and said, look, this is what we need to do, Claude. If you want to go home with this family, this is what you need to do. And the moment we walked into this house, my son was only 4. Claude just went straight to him. He sat on his lap. He rested his head on his shoulder. He followed him round. And it's been like that, 10 years later. That's still the bond that they have. And like you're saying with your son, Claude is almost, yeah, he senses changes in my son before we do. I consider myself to be quite, I have that radar, and I recognise body language signs in my son, but I think Claude's one step ahead all of the time. He will want to go into his bedroom. He will want to sit with my son, before I even notice that there's a change. So to me, it's magical. It really is. And I just want to keep investigating that and writing it into every book, because it just fascinates me. That dogs just have this sense; they just know, and yeah, and it's beautiful as well. Like, just the small touches and those small moments that I write into the scenes, that may seem small, but to especially Auties, they're enormous. Just that gentle touch, the paw on a hand, it means and creates such a change, often changes a day around. So yeah, that's really why the dogs keep appearing.
It's funny you mentioned the paw on the hand, because our Labrador, she loves to hold our hands, or if we're sitting down, her paw has to be like up over our foot. Like we're
Yeah.
holding hands at all times. So she's real
Oh,
sweet. But
lovely.
yeah,
I love
that they're just like magical creatures. I've read about how dogs can sense diabetic lows before they occur.
it.
So you're right. They do have that sixth sense of almost like all knowing in a
Yeah.
strange way. But it must be tricky though, trying to write a children's book about things like depression and kind of, I don't know, like you'd have to word it so carefully.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think initially when I wrote The Bravest Word, that book was probably started as therapy in some respects, and kind of grew from there. But yes, it was a confronting book for myself to write. So I knew it was probably going to be very confronting for, well, not just kid readers, but kind of any reader really. But yeah, keeping the language to a point where everybody can connect and everybody can understand was it took some rewording and some editing, but at the same time, I think it's just so important that we do talk candidly about it. We use the words, we talk about the feelings, the reactions, the emotions, what we want to do, how we can't cope with these feelings. I think all the time we are, I guess, um, being too careful, I guess, with words and how we approach these conversations. We're not helping anybody. So yeah, so it was a hard book to get that balance, but at the same time, I didn't really want to keep out too much of the realities of what depression does to people. So yeah, I think it's definitely a book probably that people would need to go into. I mean, I wouldn't go as far to say as a trigger warning, but certainly with that knowledge that it is, there are going to be some scenes which are sad, which are very difficult to understand if you haven't had depression or anybody who's had depression. So yeah, and there is also a dog in it, but the dog, obviously, but the dog in this case has been neglected and abandoned. So there is also that element, which kids, I guess, need to be a little bit careful when they're picking up, to know that there's no graphic scenes. I wouldn't, do that. And all of my books had happy endings. Sorry if I'm spoiling it for everyone, but
That's okay.
I don't know how to not
Just
write
makes me
happy
want to go
endings.
read them. That's all.
So yeah, so there were, yeah, but it was, for me it was a no-brainer. I had to write it, and I had to write it as honestly, as and open as possible.
And that's the tricky thing is, I don't know, there's certain generations where we kind of carry that whole, we need to sugarcoat things, or we don't talk about that's taboo, or this and that. And that's the problem, is that everyone has kind of been taught to bottle those things up and almost feel ashamed to feel
Mm.
those things and then not talk about it. And that's where the problem lies. So it is really hard to talk about something confronting, but also not sugarcoat it too much that it's not realistic and actually
Yeah.
getting the point across.
Oh, absolutely. And you can just turn to any mainstream media and look at how mental illness and mental health is often approached, and they it's not done fairly. It's not balanced. So I think when you are coming from, certainly a lot of the books that I've read recently, and The Bravest Word, they are far more balanced, in my opinion. They are not, like you say, sugarcoating, but at the same time, they're not just negative, negative, negative. It's bad. It's wrong. It's a case of understanding, and then coming from that angle of having more knowledge, being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and appreciate that just because you don't feel that way, it doesn't mean it's not real. It doesn't mean it's not totally life affecting, because ultimately depression is, and we do need to take it far more seriously. When it takes so many lives, we look at it differently as we look at other illnesses which take lives, and I don't know why. To me, it's the same. So yeah,
Yeah, and being able to kind of, I imagine it would almost give people a sense of direction as to where to go for help too, because often it's like, oh, yeah, you've got this and that's it. It's like, okay,
yeah.
well, now what do I do? And it's like, oh, you can't really do
Oh,
anything about it, and which is not true. But I feel like a lot of the time you get told that this is what you have, but that's all you're given, and that's not
yeah,
enough. You need some sort of
yeah.
direction, especially if you're neurodivergent. Like, you've already got so many extra things going on, and trying to cope with on the daily, that it could just be somebody giving you that little bit of sense of direction that could change everything.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point as well, is that when I wrote The Bravest Word, it wasn't just for people who have depression. It's actually for people, who have probably never encountered depression, or maybe have suspect that somebody they know and love is depressed. It's recognizing the very early signs, and also knowing that you don't need to have a solution. You as an ordinary person, you don't need to talk to these people with a solution. Right, this is what we're going to do to fix it, because it's just simply not possible, in so many situations. But how you approach them, and that you sit with them and you listen and you just be with them and you check in on them and you don't stop inviting them, that is what matters. So the book was very much written with that in mind as well, to say to people, it's okay that you're uncomfortable with the fact that you don't know anything about depression, but this person does have depression. It's okay. Don't panic. Don't feel like you need to go and read every book and find every possible reason that this person's suffering. Sometimes people just do, and they don't need people to come along and say, right, this is what we're going to do today. It's just sit with me, be with me. It means so much. So yeah, that was a big part.
Yeah, yeah, it's the same with, I like, people, we talk about masking and stuff a lot with autism, specifically, but I feel like with depression, anybody that has depression masks. So it doesn't matter whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. If you've got depression, it's that ability to mask the depression itself, because people often say, one of the things you hear the most often is, oh, they seem so happy. I don't understand. Like, this came out of
Yeah,
nowhere. They weren't sad.
yeah,
So there's that kind of, that, I don't know, just misinformation connected to it. Like, people just think
yeah,
if you don't look absolutely horribly miserable, then you
yeah.
can't have depression. It's
Oh,
everyone's always looking for a physical attribute to a disability. So, and that's in what we encounter all the time with neurodivergence. It's like, you don't look autistic. It's like,
mm,
so,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, always
You
looking for a
can't be.
physical. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
it doesn't. You don't have to be able to see a disability for it to exist.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if you've seen it, and I would recommend anybody. Again, it is quite confronting, but there was a most extraordinary advert commercial that was made recently, I think, for men's mental health. I can't remember exactly who put it out, but it's about two men who go to see the football, the soccer. I don't know if you've seen it.
It sounds
Um,
familiar.
yeah, it's just incredibly powerful. I broke down when I saw it. It blew me away, because I wasn't sure. Well, I kind of knew where it was going, but to actually see it, and it is very much about that masking. That's exactly what it's about, and how you never know, and that's a big part of depression, is that feeling of being a burden, of, oh well, people don't really want me around. I need to pretend. Well, they don't want to see me being miserable, so I'm going to go in and be the life and soul. And so that is, yeah, people take that on face value and they think, well, that they're fine then. But it's going deeper, and it's recognizing changes in people's behaviour that isn't so upfront, I think, and
Yeah.
obvious.
Yeah,
Yeah,
often, like, I find that friends will ask you if you're okay and you'll say no, and people that are really in tune will go, Yeah, I know you're saying that you're okay, but
Yeah.
there's something off. And I think a lot of people will blame themselves because they have asked multiple times, "Are you okay?" And you say yes, and eventually they have to let it go.
Yeah.
And then to then find out later on down the track, no, you weren't okay. You get a lot of people suffering from things like survivor guilt and the like. And it's, I mean, I always try to be kind all the time to everybody because you don't know what that person is
Mm.
going through, and that tends to be part of the issue, is that a lot of people are not kind to everyone and taking that into consideration. So
Mm.
and it can be that that little bit of kindness that you give to a stranger could be the total difference, just like you were saying with the dog putting their paw on your hand. It can make all
Yeah.
the difference. So
Yeah.
it might not be somebody you know that is more or less saying to you, like, I'm happy you're here, but
Mm.
that can make the difference.
Oh, it really does. Yeah, just those small moments, and I think it is the small moments that those small, like just reaching out, shooting someone a message, "How you doing?" Just thinking of you today. That sometimes that really is it. You may not get a response, but I think knowing that potentially that person has read that, and it really could make such a huge difference to not just their day, but their life going forward. So yeah, I'm very much with you on that one. I just always kindness first. And I know some that there's obviously going to be situations but people would disagree with that, but I don't really know any other way of living, so that's just how we do things in our house.
Yeah, yeah. My best friend, she's a lot more like, I guess, outgoing than I am. But she often, when we're out together, she'll just a random person will be walking by, and she'll be like, "I love your hat," and I'm just like, "You've just
Yeah.
made her day by saying that." Like, you just see the person light up, and it's something so small, but
Yeah.
it just, for whatever reason, it meant so much to that person in that moment, and
Yeah.
it literally took no effort to do that. So, um, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So
yeah.
true.
So what kind of got you into writing children's books?
So I think I've always written. I've always been a writer since as young, as far back as I can remember, when I was probably about 4, which is obviously a very, very long time ago. But I do think that was probably the earliest memory I have of making a book. So I think I was always writing in some capacity. And personally, I think it was to make sense of the world. Now I look back with so much more knowledge and understanding of who I was. Obviously, as you get older, so many memories fade and you forget so much. But what I also do have very vivid memories that will never leave me. Probably of those real defining moments when maybe I behaved in a way that wasn't acceptable, in society, and I didn't really understand why. Maybe when someone rejected me, they're the things that I tend to, they etch themselves into my
Yeah.
soul, and it's like, yeah, I'll never forget that. Yeah, but you were 7. I'm never going to forget that. So I think, yeah, I was always writing to make sense of myself, to make sense of the world, to escape. And that's obviously another reason why I was always reading. I was just absolutely wild reader. All the time behind my desk, in bed at night, just constantly. So I think that's probably going as far back as I can remember. Yeah, I was writing to understand myself. And I was doing that all through my teens. Probably not so much during my 20s, but still, there were definitely times when I would just sit at the computer and write some things, or a notebook or something. And but it wasn't really until I got to my 30s, after the kids were born, and when I began to kind of think, I wonder if people want to hear my stories. And that's when I thought that I felt like maybe I had something that some value I could bring to other people like me. And that's when I really stepped it up and thought, well, I'll get some professional feedback, and I'll really, own those skills, and yeah, and just see where it leads. So I don't think I ever wrote in with like making a difference to the world. I don't think that was ever, my goal. But now that I do realise people are quite keen to read the things that I write. You know, they're interested in my perspective. It has given me, I think, a boost to, represent my community as best I can, I think. And every time a new book comes out and it's received well, it just inspires me to just keep going and, taking another portion of my life I never understood and making more sense of it in a book so that I can pass it on to the next generation. And and so on and so forth, really.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the inclusivity of it all too, and also being able to educate and spread awareness. A lot of people go, "Oh, I hate that people keep saying awareness. People are aware." It's like, well, not everyone is still, but you can't have acceptance and things like that until there is awareness. Like there's so much information out there now, but a lot of people don't know where to start or where to look. So
Oh,
if it's
yeah,
starting in a children's book at home or in school or wherever that may be, that's an amazing start. Like it's a conversation starter. It's something that you can read multiple times. It's in your hand. It's just amazing.
yeah,
And often, people have such strange definitions of inclusivity. I've found too over the years that people seem to think that inclusivity literally just means we are making sure that person can participate, but
yeah,
that's not inclusivity. That's including them, but that's not the
yeah.
whole premise of inclusivity. So just being able to shine a light on things like that too is so important on so many levels. But it's
I couldn't agree with you more. And that's something I read it a long time ago when I was deep diving into the world of autism and trying to understand myself and which I think a lot of us late diagnosed auties and any neurodivergent people tend to do, is that suddenly your new special interest is your diagnosis. It's like, oh, I need to know everything about this. So I did do one thing I read was that a lot of people mistake inclusivity with assimilation, and that they're worlds apart. And like you say, just including someone in something. Often that person just needs to assimilate, and then they say, oh, they're included. They look, they're joining in, and it's like, well, actually, no. You probably put more pressure on them by making them or creating the space and come on, join in. And then they're like, well, what do? I don't understand anything that's going on, so I'm just going to copy everybody. And then we're building on that masking and that discomfort and that anxiety, and it just spirals and snowballs. And you're right that, like, I'm very much about acceptance, but I do understand this whole side of things that so many people aren't aware. And acceptance, if you force acceptance, what are you actually accepting? Just that, that quick, well, they just accept it, and and just to let them join in, like you say, and it's not true inclusivity. And since I've been sort of doing school visits and talking to teachers and what have you about being autistic and writing the books I do, I'm learning that so many people, particularly sort of a certain generation, they still only know Rain Man as this person that represents autism, and it's just so outdated and terrifying that really the media entertainment has not moved much beyond that. I mean, certainly there is change, which is wonderful, but it must come so much quicker. And again, there's that worry that if we push and force it without talking and understanding autism and neurodivergence in general, what we're putting out is wrong. I mean, The Good Doctor is a fine example of that. It really
yes, I
isn't
was thinking
great
just of that one.
it's not great representation, and I understand, like, in the intent was pure and honest, I'm sure, but ultimately the outcome isn't. It just chips away and creates long lasting damage. And it's a very big, huge topic that goes in so many directions, right to the top. And people like myself and you, we can only do so much we can do with our platforms. But I like to think that every time we do something, we're reaching just a few more people in that corner of the world, and then and it will have that ripple effect. And you can't change the world overnight. It's just simply not possible. But, we can incorporate and introduce change from as young age as possible. And, hopefully future generations, it will just become more and more inclusive in the way that we want it to be.
We need that domino effect, don't we? And
Oh, yeah.
it circles back, doesn't it, to the whole trying to get a point across that may be uncomfortable, in a way that people are not going to find it uncomfortable, because at the end of the day, people don't want to hear, they only want to hear the success stories. They want to hear about the geniuses that,
Oh,
have created this, that, and the other thing. They don't want to talk about the families that have children that bang their heads against walls and
yeah.
smear and all that kind of thing. They don't talk about that stuff. They
No.
don't highlight it. I think the closest thing I've ever watched to reality was Atypical.
Mm.
And there was a lot of kind of uproar about that too, because it was like, oh, how dare that mum be like that and blah blah. It's like, no, but that's actually, it's more raw. That's more realistic as to how people deal with those identity crises when they go from having a baby thinking that everything is normal, and then next minute it's not,
Yeah.
and your whole life changes, and who you are as a person has to change, and your
Yeah.
kind of role in life changes.
Yeah, totally. Somebody
Yeah.
described it a long time ago. I can't remember. Again, I apologise if I'm quoting someone and can't remember who it was. But someone likened it to getting on an aeroplane and going to Italy. And
Yep.
you're all set up. You've been researching Italy, and and it's exciting and it's wonderful. And then your plane lands, and it's brilliant. But you get off, and you're in Cuba. And
Yep.
it's like, oh, hang on a minute, like I haven't researched this, I don't have the right map for this, I don't have the guidebook for this, I can't speak this language.
Yep.
So it's, and I understand, I think that's a really good way of explaining it to a lot of people who don't understand. But it doesn't mean that where you have landed is dangerous or terrible or wrong or awful or is going to ruin your life. What you might uncover is that this is a beautiful country. This is a beautiful place to investigate and be a part of. You just need to shift, and reach out to people who have also landed in Cuba,
Yes.
unexpectedly at different times of their life, and talk to them and say, oh, well, what did you do when you first got here? And that's just how. And I don't know about you, but certainly what I'm learning is that, of course, not all neurodivergent people are nice.
No.
I mean, but the community is so important. Like one thing, you get your diagnosis as a grown up, and yeah, there isn't much beyond that. There isn't much support and guidance, but the community is the place to be, to listen, to talk, to just hear someone talking about how they can't wear socks. That for me was a massively defining moment. And I remember thinking, yeah, socks. Oh my gosh, I never realized socks were a thing that we struggle with. And I went right back to like being 9, 10 years old and thinking, I hated socks. I couldn't wear socks. I chose a school based on the socks they wore. So yeah, it's the community really come together, and that's for neurodivergent people and obviously people who are involved in their lives. It's important that we all immerse ourselves and support each other and share our experiences, and the honest ones, the realistic, warts and all kind of experiences that we have, so other people feel that they're not alone. And I think that's a huge thing that we often do. And also thinking about like a lot of these organisations, companies, that have these autism awareness days, they have these events, and so many of the speakers, in fact 9 times out of 10, 100% of the speakers at these events are not neurodivergent. And like, not one part of me is suggesting that the value these people have isn't there. Of course they do. We understanding the clinical side is important, but when we're not actually hearing from neurodivergent people themselves, when we're just ignoring the whole human side of something that really that's what we should be focusing on, especially in these times. If we're ignoring the humans behind these diagnoses, then we're just not understanding, and we're not making any steps towards acceptance. And
yeah, lived experience is golden. That's something that we don't learn certain things any other way than through the lived experience of others. So I guess that kind of ties in with the last question that I have for you, which is why you think your profession is so important. And I mean, obviously we've touched on a few things, but yeah.
Yeah, I think, like you say, children's books are there from the start. And they are often things that families read together. And so when you get your books with the best representation, with that balance right from the very beginning, you are creating that empathy, that compassion from word go. And so I don't think a question that's always asked in any sort of interview with any celebrity or whomever is, what's your favorite book? What's your favorite book when you were, that you've ever read? And so many people will say a book from their childhood. And it's very often around, I think, that kind of 7 to 12. That seems to be a time when I think we're just finding our independence. We're just breaking away maybe a little bit from believing everything our parents tell us or our wider family tell us, and thinking, oh, hang on a minute, that's not how it works in that family or wherever. So I find that age group is key to really get those books into their hands so that they are experiencing it themselves, putting themselves in the shoes of these people. So as far as I'm concerned, children's books are one of the most important mediums really to get the best messages out there into kids' hands. Obviously, it's not that simple because you need to get past, but you need to, there's parents, there's teachers, there's librarians, the people who hand these books to the children. So there are so many sort of steps, I guess, to overcome as a children's author to make sure your books are being seen, that your representation is correct. And ultimately, if we aren't letting people tell their own stories, we aren't letting autistic people tell their own stories from their perspectives, their experiences, then we are going to get books which are written by people who don't fully understand. And again, intent could be very pure, but if it's not... it doesn't have the right message and it's not hearing what the autistic community need and want, then the wrong books are getting in the hands of these kids. And I've probably gone off on a right tangent there, but I'm very passionate about this subject, that writing the right books, publishing the right books is so much more important than just having books that are labelled as diverse, that have this, oh, this is a great book with neurodivergent representation. Is it? Who says it is? Who wrote it? What are people from the neurodivergent community saying about this book? I always think about those kids in those classrooms who are neurodivergent, and a book is read as a class study because it's been recommended by the higher powers to the teachers and the librarians. So of course they're going to trust who's recommending the book. They're going to read it, and it's just going to alienate these kids even more. And it just devastates me. So there's so much change needs to happen in children's publishing. But, I'm fighting the fight. I'm doing what I can do from my little corner of the world. And I just hope more people join. I hope more opportunities are given to neurodivergent writers to write their stories, and disabled writers to write their stories. There simply isn't enough representation in books, TV, film, and so on and so forth. We need it, and we need that to come from neurodivergent people.
That representation should never be underestimated. So
absolutely,
yeah. No,
I went off on my mind, sorry.
I can feel your passion coming through.
Yeah, sorry. It just happened.
Don't apologise. Where can we find your books? Where can we purchase them and the like?
So they're kind of available anywhere, really, anywhere that sells books, that you can get them. So yeah, any independent bookstores, the libraries. They're published with Walker Books, so you can easily go to their website and they have the links to different places to buy them. Some of them are available in the UK. They're starting to come out in the US. So there's so across the world. Yeah, and obviously my website as well, kfosterbooks.com.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing to chat to you and get to know a little bit. Well, it feels like I've learned a lot about what you do. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I could talk for hours. So it's good that you're stopping now before I keep going.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Take care.